I'm Brad Carlton. I got another course for you. It's called Solving the Puzzle. Now, that's a curious title because what's a puzzle got to do with music? Well, think about this. If you have to jam along with something, be it a jam track, a drum machine, a track somebody sends you that they want you to throw some parts on, or a band situation, what are you presented with? Pieces of the puzzle. So you have to learn to listen closely. So I titled that Listening in a Crowd. You discern individual parts in the mix, and this helps you in your production. But then we're going to get into the idea of taking a bass line and the drums, seeing how they lock up rhythmically. And it'll help you both in your lead and rhythm playing, but it'll also help you in memorizing songs because you'll see these harmonic patterns. And finally, it'll help you when you have to create some music. When you're going to improvise or compose, you'll see more options and it'll make you a more satisfied musician in being able to express yourself. So grab your guitar and let's solve some puzzles. One of the things that a musician has to do is listen. And amazingly, that's one of the things that most people don't pay attention to. As a musician, you're constantly training your ear to hear things. I hear more sophisticated harmonies now that I'm older than I did when I was 20 years old, because you're always training your ear to hear rhythms, tone, harmonies, styles, everything about music, and pitch. Remember, we play a guitar, it's never in tune. We're always trying to play in tune. You might tune it up, intonate it and all that stuff, but when you touch it, you're always listening, just like a violinist, you're having to compensate. So anyway, the point I'm trying to get across is that you have the ability, a human has the ability to be in a crowd. Let's say you and I were hanging out together and we go to a party. And there are 50 people in the room or 60 people in the room, and they're talking, conversations, pairs of people speaking. The human ear has the ability to be able to focus on any one of those conversations. So you apply that same principle when you're listening to music. So this course is designed to help you listen to a track, be it just a bare bones drum and bass track, or a full track with more parts involved, to discern the individual parts, because the title of this course is Solving the Puzzle. I look at music like this. I am presented with some pieces of a puzzle. The entire picture will be the song. So I don't know, for example, what the possibilities are of the chords and things unless I look at the puzzle pieces that I'm given and then see what do those lie and reside in. This scale, and I'm going to show you how to do this. And it'll also help you when you go to write a tune, which I'll give you a little homework assignment later on, where you'll have to write a B section for a tune. But I'm going to start by playing various tracks, and I want to point this out that I have a few students that have been with me for a very long time, and I encourage them to buy this drum machine. I use it all the time, and I think it's wonderful. It's the Boss DR880. I don't want to sound like a commercial, but it has 500 factory presets, 500 user slots. I use it when I do music production. I can write drum patterns and entire songs and arrangements. It's got built-in bass lines, or you can write bass lines. You can mix it. You can play your guitar directly into it. You can use headphones. So the grin factor is tremendous. But we're going to use some of these factory drum patches that are in here that involve drums and bass. And then you're going to look at what the options would be when you start layering other parts on top. No different than if I hired you to come do a session. I say, okay, I got the drums and the bass laid down. I want you to play guitar. And I don't tell you anything about it. You have to use these things on the side of your head. So we're going to talk about listening in a crowd. The very first thing you do is you always listen to the drums. For any of you who have watched my courses, you know that drums are my first and final instrument. I'm always thinking of drums because the groove's important, and that's the foundation. That's the rhythmic template upon which you drop your parts. So if you're not in the groove, I don't care what you're playing, it's not going to sound well.
1, 2, 3, 4.
So what do you hear on the ride cymbal? 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Right away you're having to focus your ear to hear just the cymbals, which are not the prominent part in that drum mix. You've got this cracking snare drum, you got a kick drum. And that's one of the things that I talk about in terms of listening in a crowd. You have to learn to hear those more subtle parts. Just because it isn't mixed out in your face doesn't mean it's not important. You have to listen for that. So this track, when I slowed it down, it was probably a little easier to hear what was going on there.
1, 2, 3, 4.
1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. What's the kick drum doing? Boom, boom. 1, 3. Kick drum's on 1 and 3. What's the snare drum? 2 and 4. 1, 2 and. So there are 3 things going on the drum kit, right? And you're like, wait a minute, I thought this was a guitar lesson. No, it's a music lesson. And rhythm, we play rhythm just like everybody else, so you have to understand the drums. So if I was playing that, my right foot's going to be hitting this kick drum on 1 and 3. My right hand's going to be playing the ride cymbal, 8th notes, 1 and 2, and then my left hand's going to go ahead and play tap, tap, just like that. Simple as that. So you listen to that, and you're like, okay, now I know that I'm in this straight eighth groove. What does that do for me? Well, let's make sure that you can play along with that. I'm going to go back to the default tempo.
1, 2, 3, 4.
I'll turn that reverb off. Many of my courses, I talk about playing drums on the guitar. So I got 1, 2, and 3, and 4, and 1, 2, and 3, and 4. Make sure you can play the drum groove. That's easy enough. So let's add the bass in on this and see what we've got going on here.
1, 2, 3, 4.
It's cooking pretty fast, so let's slow it down. How many inches in a foot? You should say 12 if you know anything about linear measurement. How many half steps in an octave? 12. So you only have 12 pitch levels upon which you can have different kind of chords built and all that information, scales. So that resides on the 6th string between open and 12th fret. By the way, this course is not for a beginner. It's for someone who already has a good foundation on the names of the notes on the guitar, understands a little music theory, which I'll get you into, and is willing to go ahead and get in the deep end of the pool, because I'll show you how to look at your options. So I need to find the bass line here, because the bass line is going to define what chord or chords I can play over this. Now, I'm tailoring this course to where someone who hasn't been playing very long, wants to get their ears on, could do this. If you've been playing for a while, you're going to hear this right away, and you'll know what chord, et cetera, because you have patterns memorized, just like you have physical patterns on the guitar and rhythm patterns. You have these sonic patterns memorized. But let's listen to this bass line. Now, I'm going to roll the drums back. How many different pitches do you hear?
1, 2, 3, 4.
You see what I'm doing? I have 3 different pitches, and I would view it like this. Low, high, middle, high, low, high. So I got to find the low, because that's the root, that's the strongest tone, that's the note with the tonal gravity. So what do? Boom. Right? Now, this will fool you sometimes, because especially, I got to tell you, with the Boss, sometimes their drum patches or their bass patches, you hear almost a different key sometimes. But anyway, let's see if that's right here.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Sounds pretty good. Okay. Now I have another note. Bum, 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 bum. Does that sound like it's right next to it on the ruler, or is it down a ways? Bum, bum. Now you notice what I'm doing. I'm singing the note that I'm trying to find. This is based on the principle that you can sing, and you should be able to sing what you hear. If you can't, you need to work on that, because this is music. So bum, 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 bum. Now I got to keep singing that note. What do? I go bum. So I'm playing all these wrong notes because I'm not on my right note yet. And so what happens? Your ear's going to want to drift down, so you're going to sing what you play instead of playing what you sing. Here we go. Let's listen to this.
2, 3, 4.
So I need bum, 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 bum. So I got bum, 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 bum. Now I got to go back down, but I don't go all the way back down. I go bum. Then I go back up. So my notes are A, E, E, C, C, E, E. Is that a very practical way to play that? No. You find the notes on the 6th string, then you're going to lay it out in one position. So I can put my hand in 5th position, which means my first finger's in the 5th fret. Each finger's in its own respective fret. Look what I've got. So there's my bass line.
1, 2, 3, 4.
I know what the bass line is. Let's go ahead and put it up to speed, and you'd probably play this with all downstrokes.
2, 3, 4.
Now we get into theory, because you've been presented with this one piece of the puzzle. Well, 2 pieces. The drum groove, which is straight eighth. So that's a very important piece of the puzzle. Now you're presented with this bass line. The bass line in this case is going to establish the quality of the chord that's prevailing. And here's why. The A is the root. Well, if it was just an A note, it could be an A anything chord. Any of those. Any kind of chord. Because it's just the root. But the more notes that are in the bass line, the more different pitches, the more it's narrowing down what the chord's going to be. So in this case, you have a root and a fifth. Well, that's just a power chord. Again, that doesn't define whether it's major or minor. But then it goes to the root, fifth, flatted third. So you put those together, that's a minor arpeggio. So you know that it's a minor chord. So then now you're up and running.
3, 4.
Makes sense? All right, so I just gave you a quick overview of how you were given a couple of pieces of the puzzle, and by looking at that and studying it, it revealed what the prevailing chord would be. Now I'm going to stop on that track because we'll come back to it, because you have now what scales could you use, scale or scales. But that's a rather lean track. It's just bass and drums. Now we're going to play a track that actually you'll get just the bass and the drum track in this course, but you're also going to get this track where I took this factory patch and I put guitar parts on it. Okay, so I want you to just give this a listen, just a few bars, but take note of all the little different parts, because remember, you have to listen to the sum and then discern each of the individual parts. So let's give this a listen. Talk about all these different tracks and breaking the different instruments down, but it's very important that you apply this protocol to everything that you work on. And that's why I like having my students get the drum machine, excuse me, because that way they learn to hear it from the ground up. If you don't play bass or drums and you just play guitar, you owe it yourself to, even if you don't play those instruments, to start really listening to them and try to play them on the guitar. Try to play bass lines, try to play drum parts, because that way it'll just make you a better musician. You don't want to just be a guitarist. In the previous lesson, I referenced breaking down the drum groove. So we're going to really dig in on this. I'm going to give you some examples of different drum grooves to help you hear whether it's a straight or a shuffle, 8th or 16th note feel. Let's listen to this track.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Nice bossa nova thing. Now I'm going to roll the bass out so you can just focus on the drums. A lot of stuff going on there, right? Got the congos, bongos thing going on. But the grid work is 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. And in this Latin stuff, you have this 8th note groove, for example, in the bossa nova, and then you have accents in all these different places. That's what makes it sound sophisticated, perhaps complicated to you, because it isn't as easy as just like, that would be 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and, or maybe 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, or perhaps 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. That's like a straight rock groove. It's important you clap these rhythms. But if I'm going 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and... Do you see how those accents on the ands make it sound Latin? But all you have to remember is that you're in a straight 8th groove. Okay, so if you heard that as a straight 8th when I initially played it, good for you. Let's go to another track. Let's listen to this. And again, we're just going to listen to the drums.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Straight 8th again, with some sprinkling of some 16ths. The 16ths are 1E and a 2E and a pretty quick. You don't need to really worry about those right now. Let's listen to this one.
1, 2, 3, 4.
When you hear the count off here,
1, 2, 3.
the count is always the quarter notes. That's the tempo. So let's just follow through here.
1, 2, 3,
4.
4.
1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2. Go to 8th note. 1, 2, 3, 4. So those are your 8th notes. Notice I'm using all downstrokes. Now I go to 16th. Then you put in some of the other stuff. I'm going to turn some of that reverb out. You get the idea that when you know what it's supposed to be, 16ths, then you know where to drop your notes in, okay? Let's see if we have something here.
1, 2, 3, 4.
1, 2, 3, fall. 1, 2, 3, fall. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. Straight eighths are the 16th straight. So I encourage you to take drum grooves like this and drum bass loops and make sure you play the drums against them on your guitar. Now I don't have a shuffle here. Let me dial up a shuffle for you so that you'd have an idea of what that would sound like. Because that's that blues kind of thing, you know. We know what that's all about.
1, 2, 3, 4.
1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1. Let 2, let 3, let 4, let 1 triplet, 2 triplet, 3 triplet. I'm going to slow it down so you can get the 1, let 2, let 3, let 4 triplet, 1, let 2 triplet, 3 triplet, 4 triplet. Do you feel the difference, how it lopes? So that's an example of a shuffle. This lesson was about making sure that you can analyze and break down the groove. And then it can get more complicated when you start looking at all the different parts of what the drums and the percussion are doing. But it doesn't matter if you understand the grid work. Once you've got the grid work, at least you can get on the rails. Then you would perhaps lock up with one of the parts on the drums or play a complementary part, a question and answer idea, things like that. That's when you're tossing the ball back and forth between yourself and the drummer on the bandstand. But it's very, very important for you to focus on drums. Okay, now we're going to talk about the bass line. I already referenced on that surf thing how to find a note, because between open and 12th fret you have all 12 notes of the chromatic scale. I'm going to play this for you, and then we'll slow it down and get you to where you can hear this bass line.
1, 2, 3, 4.
So you got a straight 16th feel. We'll bring the bass line in. Now I'm going to slow it down for you. How many different pitches do you hear? If you said 3, you're correct. So we need to get the first one because that'll be the root. It's the strongest note. And it isn't always like that, but in this case it is. Your ear tells you that.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Sing that for me. Let's do that one more time.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Ba-dum, ba-bum, 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 ba-ba-ba. Okay, it's a G. You see how I did that? You got to do that process because otherwise, just fumbling around illogically, do it systematically. And then there's going to come a point where you'll learn that, okay, that's a G on the guitar, or you'll get closer. Right now, if you're a beginner, you don't have a clue. You don't know whether it's here or here or here. You don't even know the names of them. Okay, it'll get better because your goal is to get at one with the instrument and know where that pitch is. So we have a G. Notice what I'm doing with my picking or fretting hand and picking hand too. I'm using a down up, got a palm mute going on, and I'm going to play that G with each of my fingers. I don't use my thumb, but you might also do it with your thumb. The reason for that is we're going to have to lay the notes out. Let's find the second note. Or better yet, how many different notes did you hear? If you said 3, that was the right answer. So what do we have here?
1, 2, 3, 4.
Low, low, high, middle, high. And now we got a big interval. Ba-dum, bum. Does that sound a little bluesy? The reason I ask that is, and we're going to tie some theory into this in just a minute. Ba-dum, bum. Oh, it's an F. Okay, now I don't want to play it up there. It's in the 13th fret of the 6th string. 13 minus 5 is going to give me an 8. I don't want to play it there. 8 minus 5 is a 3, so I'm going to play it right here. So remember when I played all these different fingers? Now I'm going to go. I'm going to touch those 2 notes before I play. And then the next note is right below it. Let's check it out here.
2, 3, 4.
All right, let's put it back at tempo because that's kind of slow.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Now you're playing the bass line. Make sure you can play that bass line. Notice how we're using a 1 finger per note fingering. And you're not super upright. You're actually laying your fingers down a little bit. You're on the pads of your fingers, the funk kind of thing, where you're muting the adjacent strings. And I would also suggest you take this formation and play it in different octaves and in different places on the neck. Well, let's talk about guitar for a minute. We have 6 strings, 5 of which are tuned to perfect fourth apart. You got 1 major third interval right here, so that means that as long as I don't involve this pair of strings, my fingering won't change. Let's prove that. That's a G. An octave higher would be the 10th fret of the 5th string. Same fingering, right? Now I'm going to take that same G and play it on the 4th string. Oh, it doesn't work, right? It's because I've got to add a fret here. So I go. And then that same pattern. Now I have that bass line serving as make sense? So you're finding these bass lines. Now, we'll go through a couple more here. Let's listen to this one. I really like this track.
1, 2, 3, 4.
What is our groove? 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4 and a got that straight 16th going on. Let's slow it down just a little bit. Now this is an example of question and answer phrasing. The first line goes
1, 2, 3, 4.
So you have, let's say your name's John. I say, John and I went to the music store. Next sentence, John and I went to lunch. The first part of the lick is the same, and it turns out. So we're in G. I'm going to save the part where you should have listened to it, slowed it down, all that business, if you had the drum machine. That's the question, and then the answer. Now, the reason this is so important is those pieces of the puzzle have theory attached to them, because they are all scale degrees coming out of the chromatic scale. Remember, the big picture is 12. You only have 12 notes of music, only. But you break it down, you say, all right, in this case I have 1, 2, 3, 4. I have 4 different pitches, G being the strongest of them, right? Well, we need to break this down, because if you look at the notes and then you see it as a subset of a scale or a mode, then you start to see what possible scale or scales you're in, the theoretical key and all that business. So in our next lesson, we'll take this bass line and break it down and see how it resides in a couple of different scales. This is going to be a short lesson because we need to just get this concept of sets and subsets. Our set is 12 notes. Our bass line consists of 4 notes. So 4 is a subset of 12. It's contained within it. I hope you get that principle. So every time you play, for example, a power chord, you're playing 2 different notes, a root and a fifth. That's a subset of whatever scale you're in. If you're in minor pentatonic, it's 2/5 of the scale. If you're playing the Dorian mode or the Aeolian mode, it's 2/7 of the mode. If you're playing a free-form avant-garde thing, it's 2/12 of what's going on. It's always 2/12. So everything you play, unless you sit and play all 12 notes of the chromatic scale, is a subset of the chromatic scale. Now, we're not going to look at the chromatic scale so much because we want some tonal music here, right? So our tonal music will generally be 7-note scales. Then you look at what you're playing as a subset of some 7-note group. This is where theory comes into play. If I know that the major scale is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, right? Now that's right on chart number 1. Chart number 1 has got to be the chart that you have down, memorized. I know that 1 and 5 is a subset of that. So I know that I could play a power chord if I'm in the major scale. Does it stand to reason then, if you look at Ionian harmonies, another one of the charts here, that chart is set up to show you every subset, not every subset, but many subsets that stand on their own as a harmony, a chord, that are contained within the major scale, within these 7 notes. If I play a G major 13, I've got 6/7 of the scale, because I don't have a 4 in there, but I've got everything else. If I play an add 9, I've got 4/7 of the scale. So that's the way to look at it, because as long as you know what the big scale you're in is, then you can look at all these options on the table. It's kind of like if the Ionian mode is green, well, there are a lot of shades of green. If the Dorian mode is blue, there are a lot of shades of blue. Or I frequently use the analogy of cooking, which I'll allude to in a few minutes. It's real important that you know what spices exist in this dish or this dish. For us as musicians, what scale or scale tones exist in this scale or this mode, and so on. So that subset principle is something you got to wrap your head around. If you've never thought that way, I really encourage you to do that. So in our next lesson, we're going to get down to taking this bass line, doing an analysis, so we'll know what scale or scales we're in. Mode formulas, why are they important? Well, as I discussed in the previous lesson, if you know what scale degrees you're playing in a riff, and this is in the bass line, it's a subset of a mode or a scale. Let's look at this. Now, if you don't know theory, I'm going to give you a quick tutorial on how to look at this, but don't avoid studying this. You can't know it as well, if you just start out, you're not going to know as well as me, because I've been doing this for decades. But it's a process that you get on this train and you just stay on this train, and it gets to where you can just analyze things very, very quickly. If you look at chart number 1, you have the major scale modes. So they're in columns, number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then 8 is the octave of 1. So if I said, in the key of C, what is 3? You would go to 1 column, go to C, then you'd go to the right. So E is the 3rd in the key of C. What's the 5th in the key of C? Well, again, you're in the key of C, so you go over to the 5 column, and you get a little practice on your Roman numerals, right? G is the 5th. So pop quiz, I'm just going to take a moment here and ask you, and then you look at chart number 1 and see if you get the same answer that I tell you it is. Go to the key of A. What is the 4th? Okay, what did you get? If you got D, that's the right answer. Go to the key of F. What is the 6th? Did you get D? Oh, okay. Go to the key of B flat. What is the 3rd? D. So my point is, did you notice how that same note, this D, could be a lot of different numbers depending upon what key you're in, depending upon the root of the prevailing chord, what you're playing over. This is how you understand music, because you don't just play a note, you think about how it's in reference to the bass line. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 will be like they are on the chart, right? Then we have to modify those notes, because we only have 7 different notes here. And what's our big set? 12 notes. So you have a chart that's labeled chromatic scale, and you've got a lot of different things that explain the enharmonics. Okay, so if I needed a flatted 3rd in the key of G, I would go to the 3rd note in the key of G, which is B, and it would be B flat. That would be the flatted 3rd. If I needed a flatted 7th in the key of G, I go up to the 7th note, which is F sharp, but I got a flat though, so F sharp flatted becomes F natural. That's a quick overview, and I encourage you to take the time to study this, to quiz yourself, and there's a wealth of other information out there you can get to help you on this road of understanding theory. Well, let's look at our bass line and do an analysis. We need to put it in numbers. That's what we mean when we say we're going to analyze something. So we know that G is 1. What is the F? How are you going to determine that? You go to the key of G in chart number 1, and what would F be? Well, I just told you a minute ago it'd be the flatted 7th. Then what would the F sharp be? It'd be the 7th. So the part right there that's kind of like the question part, the first part of the sentence, and here's your question. That's always just G, F, F sharp, G, right? So theoretically, it's 1, flat 7, 7, 1, flat 7, 7. Or you could say 8, flat 7, 7, because 8 and 1 are the same thing. You don't need to worry about the 7. It's a chromatic connector. It's not going to be a note that we have to concern ourselves with in finding what mode or modes we're in or are available. It's just a connector. Because you could just as well go Do you hear that? We don't need to worry about that 7, okay? Then our question goes up to that B flat, right? What is B flat in the key of G? Okay, time's up. Now I'll give you another couple of seconds. What is B flat in the key of G? Go to chart number 1. If you say flatted third, you are correct. So, we have 3 important notes: the root, the flatted 7th, and the flatted 3rd, because this 7 is just a connector. Now, the reason it's important for you to think about this theory is that reveals what tonality we're in. Tonality meaning, is it major, is it minor? Here's a quick overview on your tonalities. In a general sense, you could try out a major chord or a minor chord, and that's going to get you in the game. Well, let's listen to this, and I'm going to go ahead and put it back up to tempo.
1, 2, 3, 4.
I don't know. Major? Not so much. How about? Do you hear how the minor locks in with the bass line better? Because the bass line is going to the flatted 3rd. So in a general sense, you try a major chord, try a minor chord. Now, if you were just using your ear, that's how you would approach it. Then you would go a step further and you would look at, maybe it's a G7.
1, 2, 3, 4.
That's blues. In blues, you're playing this minor tonality in a bass line, but you've got a chord that has a natural third in there. And you play around minor to major thirds and things like that. So we'll talk about how you could approach this 2 different ways. We can approach it as a minor tonality, which conforms with our bass line. All the numbers line up. Because if I play a minor chord, I'm playing a root, a flatted 3rd, and a 5th. And then if I start extending that chord, play a minor 7th, then I've got my flat 7. So a minor 7 would be a wonderful chord on this.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Okay, now he finally gets to something fun in this lesson. Sounds pretty good. Played a bunch of chords, but they were all in the minor tonality. Where did I get all these chords from? Well, this is why you want to study the whole mode formula thing. I have some pieces of the puzzle. I have a root. I have a flatted 7th. I have a flatted 3rd. Remember, I don't need to worry about that 7. It's just a connector. So I have 3 7ths. I have a subset of a 7-note scale. There are various minor scales, all have 7 notes. So any of those scales would be a viable scale over this tonality, over this bass line drum groove, because as long as I've got the root, the flatted 3rd, and the flat 7 in there, makes sense, I'm locking up. So what's 7 minus 3? 4. I've got 4 variables, and I could play some different modes.
1, 2, 3, 4.
That's the Dorian mode. That's the Aeolian mode. Now there I'm going out. I'm thinking chromatically. That's the big picture. That's kind of like getting off planet Earth and going exploring the universe. But my point is, if you know how all these options on these smaller scales, then you can, the 7-note scales, then you can start playing around with chromaticism and you do some really cool jazz things. Now if jazz isn't your cup of tea, fine, no worries. In our next lesson, we will look at specifically what tonalities, minor scales we have that offer up as viable sources for chords, riffs, fills, all that business. So I have my bass line, got some pieces of the puzzle, and now I want to start putting my picture together and figuring out what that picture is, or could be. It can be a few different things. And I like analogies. So let's say the first couple pieces of the puzzle were, I don't know, like a horse And, let's say they made a horse. Well, your picture could be of a horse race, or it could be of a farm, or it could be of a cowboy movie. It could be a lot of things. Anything that had a horse in it, right? Or a gladiator movie. All right. So in this case, your bass line, you had those 3 notes, the root, the flat 7, the flatted third. We now delve into the subset principle and apply it to our different modes. If you take the sum of this bass line, you play all those notes together at once, you get the guide tones and the root for a minor 7 chord. Guide tones are the 3rd and the 7th, whatever family you're in. So in this case, I got my flatted 3rd, I've got my flatted 7th. See how I'm playing the B flat and the F, and then my G bass. If you know this G minor 7 or this G minor 7, you'll see those 3 notes as a subset of the bigger chord voicing. So this subset principle is really, really important. It's a good way for you to get away from always wanting to play a million notes. Just break it down and look at things that are contained within it. Notice I'm not playing the 5th. I don't need to play the 5th. That's a strong tone. It's in the overtone series, so I can add that if I want to and play it over here. But let's go back to just a minor situation. So if I have a minor chord, I'm playing a root, a flat 3rd, and a 5th. Go to your charts. You have charts that talk about Dorian harmonies, Phrygian harmonies, Aeolian harmonies, melodic minor harmonies. Those are the ones we're going to deal with. Because if you look at the bottom left-hand corner of this chart number 1, you'll see that the diatonic triads are majors and minors. So 2, 3, and 6 are minor chords. So I have to figure out what key I'm in. But the street key is G minor. You hear G minor. But the theoretical key is how you'll know what major scale is going to give you the mode, right? If you didn't know that, now you know. If I want to play G Dorian over this, because I know that the second chord, the 2 chord, is a minor chord, and Dorian is the second mode, I have to find what key is G the 2 of. Go to chart number 1, go to the 2 column, go down till you see a G, then go to the left. So F major would be the mode, the parent of G Dorian. The mode is G Dorian. So it's as simple as this. You're taking an F major scale starting on G and ending on G. Right now, if you know a major scale, well, you should if you listen to this. Practice playing it over the track, but don't start on the G.
1, 2, 3, 4.
And you can just play the notes on one string. Any of that would work for you. It's real important. You just get comfortable and using your ears. When you get into the mode, you just let your ears take over. Then you can start thinking things out. But that's how you would figure out what my picture is. See? I root, flatted 7, flatted 3rd, so I'm in minor 7. So that's one possible tonality. The formula for the Dorian mode is 1, 2, flat 3, 4, 5, 6, flat 7. The numbers always refer to the root of the prevailing chord. So remember, you're in F major theoretically, but in the real world, you're in G Dorian. In the atmosphere, because G is the root, so you have to number G, A, B flat, C, D, E, F. So if I take a G scale and I go, G is 1, A is 2, B flat is the flatted 3rd, C is the 4, and so on. I've said this a million times in my courses, so, bear with me if I kind of just cut something short. It's all here. You just need to study a little bit, maybe study a lot, as we all have to. So that is my scale. I have the numbers 1, 2, flat 3, 4, 5, 6, flat 7. 9 is the octave of 2, 11 is the octave of 4, 13 is the octave of 6, right? So now I'm going to start looking at chords that I could play over this.
1, 2, 3, 4.
I could add the 9 because that's a subset out of that Dorian mode, right? I could add any of the notes out of the scale.
1, 2, 3, 4.
That's a G minor, but I'm putting a 4 in there. I could put any combination. These are all structures that are just coming from... And then I can add that 6. That has a particular sound. Okay? Makes sense? Now I could also look at a smaller set. If I look at these three notes, because I assume you know this scale. If I'm playing over this, I go.
3, 4.
What scale am I using? G minor pentatonic, right? That's a 5-note scale. Is my bass line a subset of that 5-note group? Root, flat 7, flat 3rd. Oh, yeah, I see that. It's all in that minor pentatonic. So I might just restrict myself to the minor pentatonic scale. And again, I've talked about this in many of my courses. This is kind of a summary of things that I've presented over the years and applying it to a track. I could build chords out of minor pentatonic.
1, 2, 3, 4.
I am just using the notes of the G minor pentatonic scale, and I'm building these chords out of it. But that's one way to approach it, and it gets you a sound, because if I don't go all the way to the Dorian mode, that means I'll never hit a 2 or a 6. Let's talk about cooking. You've got this spice rack, and it has 7 spices in it, and it's labeled Dorian. You got this other spice rack that has 5 spices in it, and it's labeled minor pentatonic. The same 5 spices that are in minor pentatonic are in Dorian. Dorian's got a 2 and a 6. Those are different flavors, different sounds that I might not want to put them in. I might want, as a musician, I might say, I want this picture. I don't want that color on my canvas. And that's the way I look at things, because otherwise you're just playing a bunch of notes and you're not really having, it's the difference between somebody who just throws together a meal and a master chef. I'm always amazed when I go to a fine restaurant or I play a gig, some high-end gig where the chef is just phenomenal. How they can make something just out of this world. And they're going to use the same ingredients that somebody else might use. So it's really about the art of mixing and cooking, all right? Let's look at quickly some other options. That G minor chord, that's our implied harmony, could also be a 6 chord in the key of what? Go down your 6th column till you see a G, and what is the answer? Hopefully you said B flat. You'll be in G Aeolian, so the parent of G Aeolian is B flat major. And if you look at your charts in terms of the modes, the harmonies, so you go to Aeolian harmonies, compare Dorian harmonies and Aeolian harmonies, and you'll see, okay, the only thing different is the 6. Dorian has a natural 6, Aeolian has a flatted 6. So I can use one or the other, right? Let's play Aeolian over the
1,
track.
2, 3, 4.
Different sound as opposed to you hear those subtle differences? So if I choose to take those pieces of the puzzle, the original bass line, and view them as a subset of Dorian, I've got certain spices, certain notes, certain colors to paint a picture with. If I choose to view them as a subset of Aeolian, I've got a little different sound because just one note makes a big difference. I could even mix modes.
1, 2, 3, 4.
I just mixed 4 different modes right then. Dorian, Aeolian, melodic minor, and then I did a little bit of Phrygian on the end. And it all works. That's what a jazz player does because we understand the options using these principles. So it's very important for you to look at the possible modes that we would have that would fit over this track, over this bass and drums groove. There's probably something else I should show you here. We're staying locked up, meaning our scale conforms with the bass line. We've got the root, the flatted 7th, the flatted 3rd. That flatted 3rd implies a minor tonality. But do you remember way back when I tried a major or a minor chord? The major didn't sound right. But then I said, well, what if we played a 7th chord? Let's look at the subset principle. When I play a 7th chord, I've got a root, a 3rd, a 5th, and a flat 7. Well, my bass line has the flat 7 in it. It's got the root. The bass line's got that flat 3, and my chord has a natural 3. But if I put them together, I get that 7 sharp 9 chord. So I could play 7th over this.
1, 2, 3, 4.
I played a bunch of chords. I didn't just go and play a G7, did I? I played different things out of the dominant family. Well, I look at the scale, Mixolydian. If I'm playing in the Mixolydian mode, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, flat 7. G Mixolydian is the 5th mode in the key of C. Verify that on chart number 1. It would be a C scale played from G to G, but you'd also want to visualize it as a G scale with a flatted 7th. Now I can play any combination, subsets of the entire 7-note scale, right? And that changes my sound. What if I choose just to play?
4.
That's a nice track sound right there. How do I get these voicings? Well, number one is I know the neck in terms of letter names and scale degrees. The letter names are constant. They don't change. This is always a D. Doesn't matter what finger I use. Doesn't matter what guitar I pick up. If it's tuned up, that's a D, right? If it's strung normally. But the number, remember when I explained how you look at a D note and it could be a different number in different keys on your chart. A note could be 12 different functions. It could be a root, a flat 2, a 2 or 9, a sharp 9 or a flat 3, and so on. It can be any of those 12-inch marks on a ruler. If I want a particular sound, I know what scale degrees are going to give me that sound. It's no different than knowing what the spices are in my spice rack or the colors on my palette for painting a picture. And this isn't something you just get down. It's a constant, lifelong process that you get better and better at. So when I'm in G Mixolydian, I know that I might want a particular sound. I might want it to sound more open, meaning I don't want to clutter it up with a really dense chord. That might not be what's needed right here. So I'll just strip it down and play a flat 7 root and a 5th.
1, 2, 3, 4.
To me, that works really well because it leaves it sort of open. I am not clashing with that flat 3. And as a matter of fact, what I'm playing, a root, a 5th, and a flat 7, that's a subset out of Dorian, it's a subset out of Aeolian, it's a subset out of Phrygian, it's a subset out of Mixolydian. So that, if I was comping for you on this track, and I said, okay, play G Dorian, now play G Aeolian, now play G Mixolydian, now play G Phrygian, I would never be playing something in that chord that would clash with what you're playing because I'm not playing any kind of 3.
1,
Now, I might
2,
want to do this.
3, 4.
Now that's a cool little line. It's based on that old blues move, right? But so what's the sum of what I'm playing? I've got a flat 7 and a 1. I got a 5 and a 6. Oh, okay. So again, I'm playing a subset, but I've added another spice in. I got the 6 in there. Then I might say, let me play just a G7 chord.
2, 3, 4.
Where did I get those other chords from? And this is where I've labeled this as volume 1. Volume 2 might be me just taking this track, because I like this track. I can jam on this all day. It's just, I dig it. And show you all kind of chord voicings. Because I know I'm just throwing theory out there, and you're like, well, show me something I can play. Well, that might come down the road here, because I could take this track, and let's say I'm thinking G Mixolydian. What is the parent of G Mixolydian? C major, because G Mixolydian is mode 5 in the key of C, right? That means that whatever exists in the key of C exists in G Mixolydian. It's just renumbered, because now G is 1, not C. This means that these chords, if I do this, those are the chords in the key of C. I've got a C chord, which is a 1 chord, D minor 2, E minor 3, all these chords in the key of C with a particular inversion.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Now I got to put a little garlic in the sauce. by that I mean I'm going to sprinkle in that flat 3 because my bass line's got that flat 3 and that's a blue note. So any one of those chords that has a B in it, I'm going to go B flat B. And that's how you sprinkle this stuff around, and that would be taking the chords out of G Mixolydian. And then I could build all kind of other extended chords. If I want to sound jazzier,
2, 3, 4.
those sound jazzy, right? So I've got G13, G9, G9 sus4, F over G, and then G13, G7, 6. I could go on and on, and I probably will take this track and just give you a whole bunch of different little etudes and approaches with some chords. And it'd be a great way for you to look at this mountain and say, where do I start? You know? But do you get the idea of this set and subset principle? And then you look inside the 7-note scales and you see all the different pentatonics, which are subsets of those, and it just goes on and on. But the beauty of this is, even though it's overwhelming, look at the bright side. You're not going to run out of anything to study or run out of things to play. Okay, we're going to change gears a little bit. I'm just going to play chords over a drum groove. Here we have a straight drum
2,
groove.
3, 4.
Let's say the pieces of the puzzle that you're presented with are this. I sit down with you, I say, hey man, let's jam on this. And I do this. You have been presented with 6 pieces of the puzzle. Why do I say that? Is that right? Well, look, there's 3 notes here and 3 notes here. So you got 6 pieces, right? Wait a minute. How many different notes am I playing? A power chord is just a root and a fifth. I may be voicing it with more notes, but you've got to determine how many different notes there are. So if I double a note, it doesn't get an extra count. So I just have a root and a fifth, so that's 2, and a root and a fifth. So now you have really 4 pieces of the puzzle, right? There's another way to look at this. It makes it a little easier without you having to know tons and tons of theory. We're going to go back to chart number 1. If I play a power chord, that can function as any of the chords out of the major scale except for number 7. You could verify that by going back to the Ionian harmonies, Dorian harmonies, Phrygian, right on down the line, and you'll see that the very first chord structure that's viewed as a subset, because they're color-coded, is a power chord. Because if the scale that exists has a root and a fifth, obviously it's got a power chord, right? That's your root and fifth. So if I play an A5, follow me on this. I could be in A major, I could be in A Dorian, A Phrygian, A Lydian, A Mixolydian, or A Aeolian. We're not going to do Locrian because, number 1, it wouldn't fit in there, and that's not a mode that you park on. So I could be in 6 different modes right there. Okay, so I got a piece of the puzzle that has 6 options of what the picture could be. Any of those tonalities. But because you're doing a bichordal vamp, 2 chords back and forth, this other power chord is going to limit things a bit. The most important thing to remember is you can only play in a scale that would have an A and a G in them, right? And that's not too hard. You just look at your chart, and would the key of C work as a viable scale? Yeah, it would. Because in the key of C, the A5 would be your 6th chord, the G5 would be your 5 chord. So you would be in A Aeolian during the A power chord and G Mixolydian during the G power chord. Think about what I just said.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Now I'm going to flesh it out a little bit. What if, instead of it being a 6 and a 5, what if it was a 5 and a 4? Would that work? Yes, we already verified and established that the power chord could be 1 through 6. If I was playing an A and it was functioning as a 5 chord and the G was functioning as a 4 chord, what key would I be in theoretically? Look at your chart number 1. Key of D, right? So then when I flesh it out, instead of it being a minor and a major, it's going to be two majors.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Bass line simple, it's just A and G, but that sounds a lot different than what I did a minute ago because I'm in a different key, I'm in different modes. Okay, well, let's move on down the line. Could this be a 2-1 in the key of G? Yeah.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Wait a minute. A minute ago, A minor and G was a 6-5 in the key of C. Well, it can also be a 2-1 in the key of G. If you will memorize these bichordal vamps, you'll be amazed how quickly you'll be able to determine what key or keys you're in when you play a song, because it's just patterns. That's what all of this is. It's just patterns and just a lot of them. So now you're looking at intervallic patterns. Any two power chords a whole step apart could outline a 6 and a 5, a 5 and a 4, a 2 and a 1, because if you look at the top of your chart over here where those W's exist, that's a whole step. It can't be a 4 and a 3 because they need to be side by side. Get my drift? Then you flesh out by playing the appropriate harmony, whether it's major or minor, and that comes from knowing that the 1, 4, and 5 are major chords, the 2, 3, and 6 are minors. So that's a brief overview of bichordal vamps. Now, what you need to do probably is take some songs that are based off these bichordal vamps and use them as a sonic memory aid. You know, there are millions of songs. Eddie Money tune, right? That's an example of a 5-4. Because you're in the key of D theoretically, you're playing an A chord and a G chord, and the melody comes right out of the D scale. So you might use that song, whatever song it might be. For example, what song is this? My Girl, right? By the Temptations. That's a great way to remember what a major pentatonic scale sounds like. And on and on and on. So every time you learn some theory, try to link it to some music. And I say that in all of my lessons, my courses, because let's face it, this is music we're talking about here. It's not science. Who cares if you know what the scale degrees are in this? If you can't make any music with it, what good is it, right? So there's a quick overview of bichordal vamps. We're going to get into pedal tones and things which frequently are used in these situations. Okay, trichordal vamp. What's that? 3 chords that keep occurring over and over again.
1, 2,
Same groove.
3, 4.
Your ear tells you that all 3 of those chords are in one key. What are the intervals between the bass lines? Whole step, whole step. Okay, if I'm just playing power chords, that could be a 3, 2, 1 in the key of F. But I got to tell you, the 3 chord is a rather unstable chord. I say this in all my courses. I was just telling a student the other day, it took him a while to get his head wrapped around this, but I said it's not the kind of chord that'll be your street key. That's unless you're playing flamenco. So in this case, it wouldn't, even though it's a candidate for a 3, 2, 1, we're not going to approach it as such. So where else do I have 3 chords that are a whole step apart? 6, 5, and 4. Again, there's a pattern. There must be some kind of way out of here. There you go. You could say, wow, all right, there's a million songs. The outro to Stairway to Heaven when it starts rocking. Just lumping that progression with those tunes is a great way to stay organized. And then what if I played this, for example? Sounds okay, doesn't it? But I'm actually not staying in one key because I've got a major chord, another major chord a whole step lower, another major chord a whole step lower. How would you analyze that? Well, you'd have to either look at this as a 5-4 or look at this as a 5-4. because you're going from two different keys. The only place where you have two major chords, a whole step apart, are 5 and 4. What if you had this? Doesn't sound real strong, does it? That would be the 3, 2, 1. See what I'm talking about? That 3 chord's not stable. You're going to have to make these calls on your own, and when you learn songs that are a little over in left field, take note of it. It's an exception to the rule. Not that there's a rule, but general practice. I already alluded to mixed modes when I was mixing Dorian, Aeolian, melodic minor, and Phrygian over that G minor funk groove. But even if you're just building chord progressions, you might mix some different modes. The previous trichordal vamp, where we had 3 major chords, is an example of a mixed mode situation for composition. You're building your progression using not just one key. And that's what jazz is all about. That's what a lot of really progressive rock is, where it doesn't just stay in this one drawer of key of such and such. And that's probably a little more sophisticated. I would tend to think that might confuse you a little bit more, because you have to have this viewpoint of not just being in one key. And that's generally how you learn, is staying in one key. But be aware of this principle, and then you can apply it even if you're staying on one chord.
1, 2, 3, 4.
I played a bunch of different chords, but I kept an A and a bass. And this is going to bring us to our pedal tones, which is a couple lessons away. You're looking at different keys that all have an A note in them. That ties everything together. So if I start with an A chord, well, I got an A on that. I go to a G chord, well, there are several keys that have a G chord in them that have an A and a bass. Then I go to an F chord, okay, got a couple keys there, that works. Then I went to a D, well, that's actually in the chord, and then I went to an E chord. So that's knowing your scales, not just in terms of this key, and this key, and this key. It's knowing them in terms of their common tones, and I'll explain this briefly. If you look at chart number 1, the key of C is all natural notes, right? If you look at the last 4 notes, the G, A, B, C, that's in the key of C, you'll notice it's the same thing as the first 4 notes in the next key, the key of G. And so every time as you progress into more sharps, you retain your previous sharps and you add a new sharp on the 7th step of the scale. So you're always going to have common tones, aren't you? What's the difference between the key of C and the key of G? Key of C has an F natural, key of G has an F sharp. So you have 6 common tones. So every time I go to a neighbor key in my circle of fifths, or this chart, I have 6 common tones. So I could take the key of C and the key of G and look at all the chords that are in that key, and I've mentioned this in my other courses, and I could create a composition or a chord progression that isn't just pinned down to this key or this key. It could go back and forth, or it could be places where it's a bit ambiguous. So that's a really great compositional principle, and I just wanted to point that out. Okay, we're going to run out of time here. Next lesson, I'm just going to talk about some harmonic punctuations. Get to that right now. You and I sit down to jam, and we're doing this one.
1, 2, 3, 4.
So I'm chunking out these power chords, right? And then you decide to play on top of it. You go. Well, you've just taken us into a mixed mode situation with these chord punctuations. You've got basically an A major chord and a G major chord. If you analyze that out, it's a 5-4 in the key of D, right? But then when you go, no problem there, because you're playing A, then you play D over A and A, so you're just punctuating the A chord with a D over A. You're not going outside the key of D, everything's good. But what happens when you go here? Now you're playing a G chord, that's in the key of D, no problem. But then you play a C chord, punctuation. Well, that's going to take you to another key. You've got to look at that as either G major or G mixolydian. And this is the sort of thing that if you analyze some pop, you'll see this occurring. But then the way that people play over it, sometimes they don't acknowledge that. They might just, guitar player might just play minor pentatonic or just play a lick or something, or maybe not play much of anything that would get in the way. And that's a big part of being, I hate to say this, being a guitar player. You probably wonder, what about the guys that don't seem to think in terms of theoretical terms, but play great? Well, because they know their instrument. Remember I said they know what it's going to sound like before they play it, because for all those years and years that they've played, they looked at the neck and they kept listening, and they said, okay, when I do this, it kind of sounds like this. They may not have perfect pitch and all that business, who cares? But they have a pretty good understanding of what it's going to sound like. So then when they are encountering some chords, they hear what notes would work, because that's that common note principle between the different scales. And I've mentioned that in other courses. So this chord punctuation thing is something you have to be very aware of. If I did this, Thrill Is Gone by B.B. King, right? What was the punctuation? I'm playing B minor. Punctuated with an E minor over a B bass. Well, that puts me in the key of D, because B minor be the 6th chord, E minor be the 2 chord. But if you listen to the pianist on the recording, he goes, you hear it? Okay, now we're in the key of A, because there's no E minor in the key of A, it's an E major. That little chord punctuation was another important piece of the puzzle that wasn't there originally. If I just go, the thrill is gone. If I'm just playing that, you see you could go either way. But depending upon what you punctuate, you got to know your chords and your scales and see how they're used in the progressions. Okay, pedal tones. Pedal tones defined as a bass note or a pattern that keeps reoccurring in the bass. And you know, I use this term pedal tones up on top, a repeated note, something that keeps constant, that stays on top. So we're going to look at the traditional definition of a pedal tone in the bass. Same track.
3, 4.
Many, many songs. See, I can even play those tension chords, those chords that... What does that mean? That means obviously I'm not staying in one key. You'd have to take that piece of the puzzle and solve it and say, well, what is E flat over D? That's if you're on it long enough that you need to address it. Now that's probably the best thing I've said, that you're like, finally, it gives me a break. Do you remember when we did... I said, don't concern yourself with that F sharp. It's a passing note. You don't need to think about the scale or anything. Just let things take care of themselves. Same thing if I'm playing this, if I go... I could start off just thinking about D5 and G over D, figure out what scale or scales I'm in, and then if I want to lock into that little accent, that punctuation, where do I get those notes? I don't even think in terms of a scale, because I'm not on it long enough. I would just grab notes out of that chord, and I'd look at these half-step moves. Where it goes, wherever I'm heading afterward, okay? So that's a quick overview of the pedal tone thing. Man, I could give you 100 courses on pedal tones, and it's worth your while to listen to things like Genesis. They did lots of tunes that had this pedal tone. A lot of music has a pedal tone where the drone is in the bass. Now we also have the reverse, which we'll discuss in the next lesson, a static chord. Okay.
1, 2, 3, 4.
on here? Have I changed the chord on top? Has it just been this D5, D sus2? But then I got all this, I got a little tune going because I've got the bass line moving around, so I've got a static chord up on top. One of the most common compositional techniques used because it sounds great, it's easy to play, it's good for guitar players, and it's just part of what's going on in pop music and music in general. So these two principles, the pedal tone and the bass with the chords moving on top, and the flip of it. Bass line moving, chord stays static up on top. Keep that in mind, because those are pieces of the puzzle that you should recognize. You know, I don't need to explain it in analogies. If I give you a puzzle and it's got the same basic pieces that were in the other puzzles that I gave you last week, you're like, well, I'm familiar with that. That's what you want to be as a musician. When we started, we looked at the drums as being the most basic part of the puzzle piece that you're presented with. And that establishes your groove, and you know what to drop in along the timeline for your music, right? Then we looked at the bass line. The bass line constituted a subset of some kind of implied scale or scales. It also outlined the implied chord options. And then I demonstrated when we did the bichordal and the trichordal vamps how you had a power chord. Power chord is just a root and a fifth, so it in and of itself doesn't define whether it's major or minor. You can play either or on top. What do you determine with? Your ear, your theory knowledge, and all these things. So I refer to the power chord as an open sound because it doesn't have a third in it. And in this lesson, I simply want to talk about the sus2 chord briefly. If we look at our chords in the key of D, for example, we have a D, and then we have an E minor, an F sharp minor, a G, an A, and a B minor. The modes respectively are Ionian, Dorian, Phrygian, Mixolydian. Is that right? You with me? No, Lydian's the next one. So after Phrygian, you've got Lydian and then Mixolydian. So let's slow down here. Ionian is the one mode. You need to know this stuff inside and out. Dorian is the two mode, so it's minor because the two chords minor. Phrygian is the three mode. That's the one that's not stable, so unless you're playing a flamenco style chord. Lydian is your four chord. Mixolydian is your five chord. Got that dominant blues sound, and then Aeolian is the six chord. If you look at the formulas for all those modes, they all have a root and a fifth in them. We talked about that several lessons ago. And they all have a two in them except Phrygian, because Phrygian has a... That's that Spanish sound, so that's a great way to remember that. Phrygian is flamenco. Flamenco always has that... Got that flat two thing going on. So the sus2 chord, which is basically just root, second, and fifth, would function as any of these chords. I played a D sus2, an E sus2, a G sus2, an A sus2, and a B sus2. If I sat down to jam with you and I did this,
1, 2, 3, 4.
you might hear it as an implied B minor and A major. Even though I didn't give you that piece of the puzzle. I didn't play a third over here on my side of the stage. See what I did? I made it major because if I happen to sprinkle in, so it kind of falls back into that chord punctuation thing. You got to listen to the rhythm guitar part.
1, 2, 3, 4.
So you see I'm playing a B sus2. And then I throw that major third in there just for punctuation. Now listen. I'm in a different key because I'd have to be in the key of D, right? Or in the key of A. Minor, major, whole step lower, and so on. What if I did this?
1, 2, 3, 4.
I'm just playing sus2 chords. I can't be in just one key. Follow me on this. I'm playing an A sus2, and be in Dorian or Aeolian. But then if I go up a whole step, I've got a minor chord. Now if I just played minor, minor, or... In other words, that can't be a 3 chord. If this is Dorian, it's a 2, that can't be a 3 because I'm putting a natural 2 in there. So I'm not in the key. So I'd actually be playing in 2 different keys. These are the little subtleties, and it carries over into other scale degrees, you know, whether I put a 7th in or a 4th, things like that. But the more you know about the modal harmonies and all the notes that reside in the mode, then you can start adding them on your chords, your rhythm guitar parts, and it'll help you a lot. But you don't have to get, that's the more sophisticated approach. I just wanted to point out in this lesson, to close this course, the sus2 chord is one of those ambiguous chords that could be functioning as an implied minor add 9 or a major add 9 chord. That's the bottom line.